Welcome to Paradigm Shift, the podcast where we break down the latest in low code. I'm your host, John, and today we're kicking off a debate that's been heating up across boardrooms and break rooms. Is AI coming for your job? We're seeing headlines every week, companies performing layoffs citing AI as the reason. So is this the beginning of a smarter workforce or the start of mass replacement? Let's jump in. Guys, welcome. Scott, Neil, Jordan, welcome back.
Thanks, John. Happy to be back.
So this is going to be structured as a debate, and I'll kick it off first. If you've been watching the show, listening to the show, you know I'm a pretty big AI bull. But let me start with just some numbers. I like to look at this topic in way of where is the investment happening? And looking at the numbers, if we compare to things like what it took to get us to the moon, the investment to get us to the moon between in 1962, 1975, roughly, adjusted for inflation, was about nearly $300 billion it took to get to the moon. And at the time, that was seen as something as impossible. The moon race today, I think, is to get to AGI. And when we talk about where is AI going or where are the goalposts, I think that really it's that AGI endpoint of human equivalency, a product that can do anything a human can and beyond. So if that's what we're talking about as the endpoint, then when we look at how much is being invested into AI, this helps support my point that, yes, I think that AI will replace my job, developers' jobs, most white-collar jobs, given enough time. And I think the argument is only what is the time frame of which that will happen. Back to the numbers. The U.S. spent nearly $300 billion to get to the moon. So far, what we've spent in AI on the models and the infrastructure in total from the last 10 years alone is nearly $800 billion. And by 2029, that's going to reach well over $1 trillion. We've already 3x'd our investment to get to the moon, and we're probably going to be 10x'ing it by the time we get to 2030. And that's just US investment, not global. So I'll kick it off there, and I'll start with who I know does not agree with me probably. And Scott, what is your response? Or is AI going to take our jobs?
Not right now. That's my opinion. I think if you don't have expertise in a field, it's really easy to like have the wool pulled over your eyes. And, you know, programming is one of these fields, I think, that, say I'm a business owner. I've never written a line of code in my life. And now I'm able to go use this AI tool. I'm able to prompt it and it spits out code. I don't know how to read this code. I don't know how to understand what this code is doing, but I know when I run this code, it gives me something close to what I prompted for, right? That's really impressive. And that's where I think a lot of this hype is coming from, to say, oh my goodness, like I don't need to hire software engineers anymore. I can do all of this stuff myself. What I see in practice is companies are still going to be hiring software engineers. You still need someone to understand how that code works, understand where things go off the rails. So I'm not saying that no one will lose their job because of AI in software engineering. But if your job is taking a well-defined specification that gets handed off from some senior engineer, and your job is to basically read through the specification and type out the code that implements that specification, AI can do that. So those jobs are probably going to be gone. But this whole idea that we're not going to need people that understand how software works anymore, because now everyone, Joe and your brother, are going to be able to build software on their own, I think is and not just software, but enterprise quality software, production ready software. I don't see that in the very near future, say 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I don't know. But I just don't. Yeah. So I think that I'm so tired of the hype around everyone. Like everyone's, going to be out of work. I think what will happen is what we traditionally define as entry level software engineer jobs will change. And I think there will be less focus on memorizing syntax or memorizing algorithms because I don't think those things will matter as much anymore. But I think there will still be people, and there will always be people in the roles of software engineer who are thinking about how software systems interact together, how they um, are built, how they scale, how are they fault tolerant, these kinds of things.
Neil and Jordan, I'd like to get your takes too, and then I'd like to open up the floor so we can respond to each other. But Neil, let's start with you. What's your personal opinion?
Yeah, I think it's more in line with Scott's in that it's just going to increase the efficiency for pretty much everyone, right? So let's say you have a team of 20 engineers. If let's say five of them are senior, right? Um, and as Scott mentioned, the tasks, if they know what has to be done and why, and they've made decisions and, they understand the architecture and why this thing needs to be built, and the only task left is for it to be built. If 15 of those 20 people are the execution team, then yeah, I think AI is completely taking over the execution of tasks. But I think when it comes to, you know, decision making where you have to take in a bunch of different factors, right? And I don't know. I just don't see people trusting AI to make those types of decisions, right? So there's kind of a threshold on I'll let AI do something for me, but I think there's going to be a big hesitancy for people, whether it's business leaders or tech, you know, innovators, to let AI make decisions for them. So I kind of see that as a mental barrier just for people adopting it. Um, but as far as it completely, taking away the software engineering job, I don't see that quite happening, but there's going to be a massive shift.
And Jordan, what say you?
I'm kind of interested in toying around with the idea of AI replacing more senior developer roles, actually. From like a purely like financial bottom line standpoint of, these industry leaders within the tech space, they are able to basically get it to a point where I think it takes good to get good out of AI when prompting. So I think there's definitely some like substantial baseline knowledge that somebody needs to bring into it to get uh, solutions out of it. But if, they can all of a sudden have maybe a handful of like mid five-figure employees and like one senior dev that they might be paying like well into the six figures or something, then they could maybe replace X amount of other six-figure developers that they no longer need to rely upon because they're getting 90% of the way there, and all they have to do is have their one guy review the code. Maybe he's doing that in some way, shape, or form with AI too, to like back check whatever he's checking, and we get to a similar result. I don't know.
Jordan, thank you for joining Team AI. Welcome. It's nice to have you. And I just want to say, actually, like seriously, for a second, I'm going to be, I think, playing a bit of the heel or contrarian a little bit to just exaggerate, just for the sake of fun conversation. But because I have been recently, as you guys know, vibe coding a bit using some Bolt and mixed results. So my confidence level that AI is going to take my job went from here to got knocked down a bit. But I think you make some interesting points. And Jordan, I just want to expand on what you said, which is more of like a capitalist point of view that I think is interesting to me, especially as you zoom out and I mentioned what the investment numbers are. The investment numbers, like how much, where the money is going and where is the most value for AI. I think businesses target, because AI is going to, I think, replace a lot of white collar jobs, and that could be like data entry stuff. That's more obvious. But I think why it's so popular that the debate that software developers are going to be replaced is because they're one of the most high value jobs there is in a business. And that's what AI, I think, is aiming for, and that's what interests business owners the most, is the prospect of replacing a high value, high cost segment of their overhead for their company is really appealing and sexy. And I think that we're seeing, like, Microsoft has been doing a lot of rounds of layoffs. One of my friends got laid off. A lot of the big 10 companies have been doing layoffs almost across the board, and that is probably a combination of just general market conditions, headwinds, et cetera. But I've seen a lot in the news of citing AI as a potential reason, and definitely for hiring freezes. I have seen across the board that people are saying things like, "We're not going to hire this job unless you can prove that it can't be done by AI." That probably means that they're not going to hire data entry people. The jobs report that came out a couple of days ago noted that there was not a lot of hiring in tech sectors being done. There's still jobs being added to the market, but not a lot in tech sectors. People just aren't hiring. They're letting go. They're consolidating. They're saving money. They're automating, and AI is doing a certain number of it. I'd like to believe, although there's no numbers really to support it exactly yet. But I think that all of this money is going somewhere, and it's going to lead to somewhere. And there's going to be a displacement on a certain scale. And to me, the debate is really only, what is the time frame again, and what is the scale? I personally believe that we probably won't have seen as big of a displacement as we're beginning to see in the workforce that we've ever seen ever. Like, industrial revolution is something that people talk about a lot. Like, that was over the span of decades. That was easy to recover from. That gave people time to learn a new skill, to do something else. And a couple of you mentioned that people are going to their jobs are going to change. And that's probably true. They're going to be like, but I don't necessarily buy the argument that, like, AI is, because it's going to enhance your job. Like, if you have 100 developers or 100 of any profession, and which AI can help you do 10x, right? I just don't think those same 100 people are going to exist. Like, yeah, one person maybe can do the job of 10 people or 100 or whatever the scale is, but the rest are going to have to figure out what to do. We can't all be prompt engineers. So where do I think this is leading? I think that there's going to be a big displacement that's going to be tough for the market to recover. That includes software developers and anybody else. And I think it's probably going to happen within the next 5 years, just based on the amount of money that we've spent on AI and will continue to spend, which is just unprecedented with anything else that we've done. Does anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm curious what you guys think are kind of the, like, if the goalpost is, replacing, people in the workforce, right? Or you're talking to an AI and pass the Turing test, right? Like, what are the major, like, I'm not super familiar with, the under the hood, science of it, but I've got to imagine there's probably some serious roadblocks to reaching that point with decision making, right? Like, is there a certain task or thing we expect of AI that's kind of getting past that point is kind of a plateau? Like, bringing it back to your moon analogy, right? So in whatever it was, 70 years, we went from first flight to being on the moon, right? And then if you look at the past 55 years after that, one could argue that, the rate at which we've innovated for space is, plateaued significantly. Is there something within AI that could potentially kind of be that same roadblock or hurdle that I kind of see as maybe getting past I don't know. I'm still kind of on the fence of, is there some kind of roadblock like that?
Let
It's
me tee
data,
up Scott because I know you have Scott. You have some thoughts, but I just want to tee you up because this is a great argument because I think that what you're trying to get to is just some context. I think first
right?
that right now where the investments going to for AI is infrastructure, compute, and there's a question of like, okay, so if we're satisfied with the architecture that it uses today, and all you need to add is manpower, like, does that get us to where we want to go? This is so, Scott, where do you think that the how machine learning is if it all you need is just more power to get it to be human equivalent? I'll start there.
So no, I don't think it's just power. I think it's data. And like I'm speaking out of my rump because I'm not an AI researcher by any means. I don't, I read papers and I make my conclusions from these papers that I've read. And my understanding is basically all of the modern LLMs that are out there, foundational models, are trained on basically every scrap of data on the internet that's out there, right? And from my understanding, what researchers have found is as the rate of AI generated data makes its way into the training data that AI models are trained on. So as we have more AI generated content out in the world, more of the training data that new AI models are trained on is AI generated, and that contributes to model collapse. So if we've already trained the like most modern models on all of the data that exists currently, what are we going to train them on? So there's like two thoughts. You can either continue to train them on human curated data, but if you think about how much data is on the internet today, that's over the course of 30 years or 40 years, right? Um, so there's this debate of synthetic data. Could AI models generate data to train new models and sort of like bootstrap these models from synthetic data? Maybe, but that's what I think is the biggest hurdle right now. And investment isn't going to change that, right? You can't I don't know, you can't magically synthesize like 40 years of human knowledge from nothing. So that's kind of my take on it. That's the insurmountable hurdle.
Feel like human creativity is this like non-renewable resource of like, we are drinking up all of the oil that takes billions and billions and billions of years to renew, to power things, but like we're never going to see that regenerate within our lifetimes. And it's like AI has already gotten to the point where its intake is all of our human creativity that's on the internet or elsewhere, and it's like it has nowhere to go now, right? Like it's just now regurgitating and uh intaking its own slop.
I mean, I think that they're just statistical models, right? So all they're doing is they are, there's these different weights in the models that are, defining the path of how like basically things are generated. And so like they're making decisions on all of this data that's occurred in the past, but there's like people talk about reasoning. Well, my opinion is that AI models are not reasoning, they're just regurgitating. And so what you see, and this is even across the board, like from my experience using LLMs, or what we see like with breakdowns in self-driving autonomous vehicles, like as you get to any sort of novel circumstance, the ability of that model to generate reliable, reasonable outputs breaks down, right? So that you hear about stories of like cars driving off the road because there was like emergency signal, like whatever, like sirens in front of them or emergency lights. And so they just like, that to me is what humans are capable of doing, is we can take a very, very small amount of information and reliably generate reasonable outputs. That's why that's why you want a human driving the car. That's why you want a human making your decisions. That's where I think AI is going to like fail to progress. Is you need so many examples of these novel contexts that just don't exist.
An interesting experiment you can do, and I think it might be across, or at least a couple of weeks ago, is across all the major models. You say if you prompt it and say, yeah, like, give me a random number between 1 and 20, and they all say 17, because they're the result of training, and that's the most likely number that people choose as a random number. It's not actually generating a random number. It's, to your point, that it's just the result of what it's trained and not necessarily doing a lot of thinking on its own.
On that
Um,
note, John,
Go ahead.
I'm curious what. So, the one issue that they've been running into, maybe we touched on it last time, was AI just spitting out a number, right? It has to answer. And so, well, maybe next evolution would be showing what's behind the curtain on that answer. Like, if everything outputted is going to be, weighted and say, well, you know, based on stats, majority or 85% say the answer is this, therefore I'm outputting that. But if, there's obviously lots of scenarios where a human can look at that scenario and say, nope, for this particular case, we need to not do what the 85% are doing. We need to take the 15. So I'm curious if the outputs can show us more, right? So if there's any ambiguity in the answer being calculated on the AI side, show that in the results, right? Because there's this kind of like false confidence from AI currently, right?
It's an interesting. Like, I love like talking about that problem because essentially like a human could explain to you how like what their decision making process was. With AI models, it's there's no there's no thought there that the AI model can describe. There's a really interesting. I read a book a while back called The Alignment Problem, and it talks about basically like how there's this gap between how AI models generate outputs and how human values fit into that. Basically, there's like it's like they're not like AI models just generate output based on their training data. And there was they like described this example of this research project where they were training AI like an AI model to identify malignant or benign tumors and just from photographs, right? So they're showing it all these photographs, and it got really really effective where it would uh, correctly identify malignant versus benign tumors. Um, and so they started, talking, could we roll this out? We're going to get rid of doctors, blah, 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 blah. What they actually found as they dug deeper and deeper into the research is basically the AI model was like looking for a ruler in the picture because most pictures of malignant tumors have a ruler in them, right? Versus most benign tumors don't for some reason, right? And like these are the kind of things that make me really leery about this idea that we're just going to give up control to AI because to like someone who doesn't understand how the model is making decisions, you can say, like the outputs look good, but like what's actually going on under the hood could be totally nonsensical. I don't know. That's
Be interesting if those like values, those human values you talked about were like settings, right? Like you could turn the knob up on, a certain value for a specific AI up to 11, right? So certain companies, if they have their own AI, are saying these are the values that we're going to turn up um, the weight on when it's making its decisions.
yeah. Yeah, it'd be. I think to your point, I think it would be also interesting if we could even qualify those values because there's weights in AI models, right? You can tweak things and change how the layers of the neural network are interacting with each other, but we have no idea what those weights mean, right? You can't be like crank up the kindness, like nobody like that doesn't, yeah. So you have no
You know,
idea where these outputs are coming from.
one thing that makes me feel really good is as I've been vibe coding for the past couple weeks on this app, and I get stuck in like it would find an error, and then I'd say, no, still broken. and then it was the one thing that just made me feel really good. I noticed is that I would do that probably 10 times. 10 times I'd be like, no, it's still bad. And then it would be like, oh, I see the issue. It's so clear. I'm definitely going to fix it. Now it's totally fixed. And like the way that it was trained to like tell me, in this case Bolt, tell me like it found the issue, made me feel like, oh, okay, cool. It knows. Even though it didn't.
And it
So
was
it's
still
like
broke.
and it was still broken. Yeah, but I just loved how it would tell me and they make me feel good that like oh you know how AI is like there's memes on the internet. It's like where it's like, oh, it's like, oh, you're so right. It's always so supportive and agreeable. Um, but that's a side note. Let's get back to workplace. What do we think is actually going to happen? So based on wherever you land on how capable it is, what the ceiling it is for AI, who's at risk to actually get displaced? And let's narrow it down to like software development. And one thing that we've already been talking about with our last episode with Docket, I think things areas like QA is particularly vulnerable. Lower level developers are particularly vulnerable, and I think there's a case to be made that even senior level developers, potentially architects, maybe less so, if the company values human decision making. But if it doesn't, and if their risk threshold is at a certain level where they'd be okay with mess ups, if it's going to save them $500,000, $1 million, couple million in senior developers.
Yeah, my take on this is there are definitely going to be jobs that are impacted, but I look at it as, did the shovel get rid of the construction, or like let me take this. I'm already off the rails, but okay. So you picture, like, I don't know, like people are doing construction with shovels, right? They're digging holes with shovels, right? Did the invention of the excavator kill the construction worker? And the answer is like, no, we just built way more shit and bigger shit and more impressive shit. And that's what I think is going to happen with software, right? Is there's still going to be people that are experts in using the tools to do the job, but I think the scale on which you're able to do these things is going to be larger. And so I think that there's just going to be more software in the world. Like if you think about how many companies would love to have custom software for their business, but they can't afford it because it's been this really high bar, right? And it's, you think about a few hundred years ago, you couldn't build a 3,000 square foot house unless you had 25 people with shovels to build the foundation or whatever. Like that's kind of where I think we are in software development. I think there are going to be more software projects in the future, and I think there's like people are going to be displaced, but you're going to need to learn a different skill set. So that skill set of, again, taking a spec, translating into code, that skill set is not going to be valuable anymore. But the ability to solve problems and think about abstract concepts, I think, is going to be the skill set that people are going to need to develop if they want to stay in software development.
That's a contrasting point of view, and one that I've seen most company leaders take, which is that I'll call it like the enablement point of view, where it's like AI, yeah, probably going to displace, but really ultimately it's just going to enable us to do more. I just don't know if that's good. Like, I could see that where pretty much everyone, if you can build more, then you'd build more. You can do more. AI will let us do more. And I've heard even some people say, like an AI expert say that like this is a great time for people to start companies because everybody's going to be using like making apps now. Everybody can start a company to make an app. But how much how water does that really hold? Like, is there going to be like, are consumers really going to like be able to support? Is our economy just going to be on steroids because we're just going to be like consumers times 100? Like there's going to like everybody's going to there's going to be so many more, tenfold more companies now because people who are displaced or whatever, they could just go start their own company because it's so easy to now. I just don't I don't know if I buy it. I don't know if I buy it. I just don't know if I buy that we're not the displacement's not going to like be so detrimental to the economy that we might risk collapse. Because although a shovel is like pointed to construction industry, like AI is a shovel of like every job, in every industry. Let's bring it back to low code. Why looking at like, okay, traditional software development, I think this is an interesting topic because AI obviously is revamping, putting hyper automation into software development in general. But what case is there to be made for low code and looking from the outside looking in? Like you on paper, you might see that no code platforms mm, are encroaching on low code. Are they displacing low code? Um, or is low code just going to be like the new high code? And then there's just going to be no code platforms like Lovable where you just prompt and it just spits out an app. And low code is going to be more like the high code where it's like you want stability, you want like you can have more control, less trade-offs. What do you guys think?
It's kind of an interesting point of like it could almost be the best of both worlds. Like you can tune it to the degree that you need, whether that's security or infrastructure or whatever, but you can also build it quickly.
Yeah, I think just like AI now can go grab snippets of code, I think maybe the pieces that can be put together in low code will end up being the building blocks that AI can grab, right? So if you got a low code microservice that does this or that, AI can maybe piece those things together, but um, maybe not in the weeds of it, right? So it can copy someone else's Java code. It knows someone else's Java code works, but if you asked it, it can't come up with the original code, right? So um, I think, yeah, I think for low code, it just becomes low code apps or these pieces of functionalities widgets just become like known snippets that you can go and grab from GitHub that AI can go and get now.
There's a cautionary tale, which I already told you guys about. Like, yeah, I mean, just in my vibe coding experience again, just to bring it back to me because I just like talking about me and things that I do. But one thing that I've noticed in the no code platforms, both Lovable, et cetera, is that AI, in the same way that it still has some trouble with iterating, like specifically, like this is easy to see with images, like, oh, can you change that detail? You have to be explicit, like, and do not touch the rest of the image and keep everything exactly the same. Otherwise, it might just like come up with a whole brand new image, right? And it's like it turns into, it still happens to me. Turns into a game of whack-a-mole where I'm like, hey, I change the fence to be blue. It'll make a blue fence, but then all of a sudden it'll like add a bird. I'm like, no, don't do that. And then like remove the bird, and then it'd be like, and then it would add a tree. I'm like, no, what the fuck you doing? Then so it's in the same way. I feel like it's doing the same thing with code bases as I've been using Bolt, where I'm like, okay, change this, and then it was like, oh, okay, and then it like did some other stuff that I didn't want it to do. And I'm like, no, remove that, and then it would say, okay, great, it's removed. It would tell me that, and then I'd still see it. I'm like, no, it's still there, and so it's like, it does have this problem with one, context and iterating on things that can make it still pretty dangerous. And I know that that's one of the big arguments against using no code and AI assisted code in like a business environment where you value stability and security. Um, and I think that's also where low code fits in and shines because it's still relatively fast. It's maybe not as fast as write a prompt and make a whole app, but it's definitely faster than high code, which is like its main selling point in the beginning of it. It can be quicker than high code, get to market quicker. So you still have speed, more speed than high code. And most importantly, you have the guardrails to keep things contained and under control, the oversight and the governance tools. So you have this like little perfect little environment to make things. And if it's AI assisted now, which all of the low code, no code platforms are, you can move quickly and still be safe. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I would agree. So that's kind of the low code sweet spot, you think, is, well, as of right now, you've proven it, or not proven it, but from your experience, vibe coding is via prompt is probably for an entire application, maybe a bit faster. But if you were just doing some normal Mendix work as yourself, it would be probably quicker for you to do it than to do it properly than to have the AI do it, right? And then
Yeah.
maintain all the control.
There's this oversight perspective that's hard for no code because it's writing code and the people who are using it are not coders themselves. So there's this visibility, transparency problem because they don't really know what's behind the scenes. Whereas with low code, things are that problem's less so because it's abstracted code, visual code. So it's a lot easier. The learning curve is a lot easier to understand. So I can look and peek at what's going on. So if low code platforms like Mendix move to like prompt based apps, I still have that visibility and transparency because I can just look and see and I don't have to like spend a lot of time to learn coding languages, right? I only need to know what visual coding looks like in Mendix, which is a much smaller lift than, learning Java or something like that. Do you guys have any comments on that?
I think the difference in low code is you already have the building blocks produced and you're just snapping them together.
Mhm.
And so if you move on to this prompt based, software development, there the AI model is outputting these Lego blocks snapped together. The big problem that I've run into with vibe coding is you can ask, hey, I want you to build me this website. I want you to add a database so I can store some things in there. And then you'll ask like, hey, I want you to add these things to the database. And next thing you know, it's pulling in code from a totally different database or a totally different library. And so like, if you don't know what's going on under the hood at all, you may not recognize that like you've now got a Frankenstein like monster of a code base. And I think that's the risk that I see or that I've run into with vibe coding is it's like things are not cohesive. They don't actually work together. Maybe at the end of the day you get something that kind of works, but it's not cohesive. Whereas you look at, low code, there's not really a way for it not to be cohesive because you're just building applications with all of these pre-built components. So that's the big advantage I still see in these kind of low code, or even if it's a no code tool that's based in like, a traditional sort of, you have Lego block sort of architecture of the platform. I think there's a huge advantage there over kind of having no guardrails and just vibe coding.
Vibe coding tools kind of seem like the 3D printers of software, like great for prototyping, but at the end of the day, it came from plastic out of a tube, and
Yeah.
functionally it's, you're not going to use it for a long time, but it can give you really good ideas on maybe how to build the real thing.
Yeah. I think that's a really good analogy. What I think will probably happen with AI and software development is right now it's like all the rage. Everyone is like 100% on board with the AI train. And I shouldn't say everyone, but I think that's kind of the general way that the winds are blowing. I think my guess, if I had to predict the future, is there's going to be a handful of major sort of mishaps with applications that have been released primarily coded with AI, whether it's like data breaches or, kind of PR disasters. And people are going to realize like, oh, this is a risky way to run a business. And I think AI is going to change and fall out of favor for being this like tool that's just going to come in and totally change the way that we develop software. I think there's going to be there's like there's going to be like the swing of the pendulum, and right now we're way over here, and then it tends to go back over here, and then somewhere we end up in the middle where it's like, hey, we use AI in software development, but we don't totally throw all control away to AI.
I agree. I think there's probably going to be a pendulum swing back. There's been a lot of layoffs and probably will be a little bit more. And I think that companies, it seems like, are probably jumping the gun with how much value they think they're going to get out of AI. And then probably will come back a little bit. I don't think we'll go back to like, oh, we laid off 9,000 people. Let's hire those 9,000 back. But they'll probably hire a little bit, a little bit back, and things will center a little bit more.
Appliance
Yeah.
also could throw a massive wrench into things, right? Um, compliance, especially for international companies using it, might end up with different compliance laws within each country that you've got to deal with. So, yeah, I think there's going to be quite a few hurdles before it's smooth sailing.
I mean, from a policy standpoint alone, like every single person in the House and the Senate is probably behind and ignorant on rolling guardrails out for something like that. And it's simply because there's troves of money caught up in it all.
Mhm.
Like, that has to be affecting it too.
What do you think about the UI UX, Jordan? Because it seems like marketing, visuals, anything around design seems really ripe for AI picking.
I think it's good
So-
at it personally, especially from, the help that I've asked it for with even within, developing in the modeler, just like, hey, this is what I need to do. Even small lifts, it's quite good at it. As long as, I know where certain things need to be placed in order to make it all like work together, I'm sold on that matter. Like, sweet, okay, I don't have to write SAS. Awesome.
the risk there, like that it goes off the rails, it seems much less because it's like, okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? Things aren't going to look right,
Yeah, you're gonna have pink instead of blue or something.
Well, it's a solved problem, right? Like there's not a ton of room for interpretation
Yeah,
in that space, right?
it's very true. It's highly
There's an argument that AI like can't create anything new just by way of it, it's trained on things that already exist. And to that, I would say, so like designers are probably saying, the denialists are probably saying like, it won't be able to like create anything. Like I could still like, it won't have human creativity. And within software development, as far as design goes, I would say 99% are just like copies of ideas that already exist. And everybody's either following Material UI or some design framework that's already there. No one's really creating new things. So
Yeah, I would agree with that. And yeah, again, within that space, I feel like there are a handful of highly regarded design libraries that, you know, a good majority of the internet is based on. And outside of that, like, yeah, I'm sure there are some very niche boutique style design firms that, will design a topography for you and yada yada yada. And I mean, outside of that, like, nobody cares.
can we jump through the thought rabbit hole really quickly? Because it's something I was thinking about in the shower, as I always do. Is that so? If we all agree that AI might replace lower level engineers, and what that will leave is seniors and architects, people with the experience to make smart decisions, of which AI can't. What does then the path look like to get to be a senior engineer? Like, because normally like you start low, right? You learn on the job, but now that that doesn't may not exist, like what does that mean? What does that look like? You just go to school and instead of like just stopping with a computer science degree, like you just like you learn until you're an expert before you start working. What does that look like?
I think so. If I think about what work looked like when I started as like a junior engineer, it was very focused on tasks. You would get a task, you'd complete the task, and so like just the skill set that you had to learn was like memorizing how things fit together in the sense of like how does the syntax work, how do you know like, so I think that that skill set is not going to be what you need to be a junior engineer anymore. I think that the skill set that you're going to need to develop is generally what we've reserved for higher level roles, and that's just general problem solving. So I think like what's going to happen is you're still going to have people, you know, that are at the like they're like sort of what you would think of as like the enterprise engineer, right? They're like overseeing the entire organization. But you're also going to have people coming in that are like, "Hey, we need someone to solve this corner of this problem in this department." And so instead of writing code, you're going to be focused on a very narrow problem. And as you develop more skills, your like focus on problems can become more and more broad. But that's where I see like the shift in careers are like people, I don't know how valuable it's going to be to study, college level C programming anymore, right? Because it's like, is it useful to memorize the C syntax and understand all of the nuances of how programming languages work? No, like, I don't think it matters because now, LLMs can generate code that do what you need it to do. But understanding where and how you solve problems in code is going to be the more valuable skill set. So not necessarily the code piece of it, but how do you solve problems with computers, right? You only have a handful of tools in your tool belt when you're working with computers. You have like logical statements, iterators, these kinds of things. So I think that's where it's going to shift. You're going to be more focused on how do I solve problems inside of the bounds of using a computer.
I think also to like give kind of a shameless plug to Paradigm here of like, I think it's going to take smaller shops who like really value that problem solving capability from their staff to like bring in, and I say this and speak to it from, personal experience now at this point of like when Scott originally reached out to me about working for Paradigm, I was farming at the time. Yeah, I had had experience in web design, front end development, that type of thing, but I had been, out of it for a little while. And but I had all, acquired some of these skills along the way. And for, you know, you as a small business have to think about the bottom line as well, but you're also maybe able to think about development of junior developers more so than Microsoft or whoever who is just beholden to their shareholders at the end of the day. And if those stocks aren't increasing in value, well, then they're not doing it right. So it's like, I think that's like the ultimate value in working for a small company who offers like boutique solutions for their clients too. Of like, as somebody who's very junior in their career, from like a software engineer standpoint, like that's what you're going to have to look for. Somebody who's willing to take a risk on you.
Yep. Hiring younger devs is much more of an investment, I think, than it was maybe a few years ago.
Definitely. Um, so is AI coming for your job? I don't know if we got any nearer to the answer, but I think that the answer is, as always, it depends. What level you are, what exactly your job is. Does your company value human decision making? Does it value security, stability? Um, it seems to me that like within the next decade, a lot of jobs will be automated. That's just my opinion. But human reasoning is always going to have a place. And I don't know. We'll see. That's it for us this week. Thanks for coming on, guys, and chatting. Just an FYI, next week on the 18th, Friday the 18th, we are going to be in Denver. We're going to be showcasing a new widget that we have. We're going to be showcasing automated QA with AI. So come on down. We'd love to see you. Looks like we're going to have a good showing, bigger than our San Diego showing so far. So that's going to be awesome. But please check it out. I'll post a link for the meetup in the description of the show. We'd love it if you could be there. And if we don't see you, have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yes.